When I look back on that morning, it feels like it happened in another lifetime. The sunlight that came through our bedroom window looked the same as it always did. Soft, golden, peaceful. But that peace didn't reach me anymore. Something inside me had shifted long before the truth ever came out. I remember lying there beside my husband, Michael, listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the faint sound of birds outside. For years, those were the sounds that made me feel safe. I used to think mornings like that meant stability, love, and partnership. But that day, all I felt was distance, like there was a wall between us that neither of us wanted to admit existed. He stirred beside me, reached for his phone, and smiled faintly at the screen. That tiny smile, the one that used to warm me, suddenly felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I didn't even know why at first. Maybe it was the way he turned slightly away, like he didn't want me to see what he was reading. Or maybe it was the silence that followed. The kind that sits heavy in the air, daring you to ask questions you're not ready to hear the answers to. I didn't ask that morning. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was imagining things. Because that's what I did best. I rationalized the unease. I had been doing it for months. You see, I believed in marriage, the way some people believe in miracles. My parents had been together for over 40 years. They fought, sure, but they never gave up on each other. And somewhere along the line, I decided that's what love was. Staying, no matter what. So when Michael started coming home late, I told myself it was work. When he seemed distant, I told myself he was tired. When he stopped reaching for me at night, I told myself he was stressed. And when he smiled at his phone that morning, I told myself I was overthinking again. I wanted to believe in the version of us I'd built in my head, the one where we were unshakable, where love conquered everything. But deep down, I already knew something was breaking. I just didn't want to look at it too closely, because I was afraid of what I'd find. That morning, after he left for work, I stood in the kitchen making coffee. The mug he used every day was still on the counter, the one I'd bought him for our 3rd anniversary. Best husband ever, it said in big, bold letters. I remember laughing when I picked it out, thinking it was cheesy but cute. Now, as I stared at it, the words almost mocked me. I took a sip of my coffee, trying to shake the unease, but it lingered like a shadow. I could still smell his cologne in the air. It used to make me feel close to him. That day, it only made me feel alone. For the first time in years, I sat down at the kitchen table and really thought about my life, about the woman I'd become, about the things I'd stopped doing for myself. When did I start walking on eggshells in my own home? When did I start apologizing for needing affection? When did I stop recognizing the person staring back at me in the mirror every morning? I didn't have answers. All I knew was I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that seeps into your soul. Later that day, as I folded laundry in our bedroom, his phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't have looked. I'd always believed that trust meant not snooping. But something about that moment felt different. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was my heart whispering that it couldn't live in denial anymore. I walked over, hands trembling, and looked at the screen. It was a text message. Just a few words. I missed last night already. My world stopped. I didn't know who it was from because the name wasn't saved, just a number. But I didn't need a name. I knew. My body knew. My heart knew. I stood there frozen for what felt like forever. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. The air felt heavy, thick, like I couldn't breathe. I remember hearing my own heartbeat, fast, uneven, echoing in my ears. There's a strange moment that happens when your reality breaks. It's not like in the movies where everything crashes dramatically. It's quiet, still, almost numb. I didn't cry right away. I didn't scream or throw things. I just stood there, feeling the life I'd built begin to crumble around me in silence. For the rest of that day, I went through the motions, cooked dinner, cleaned, smiled when he came home. I watched him eat the food I made with the same hands that had just held evidence of his betrayal. I listened to him talk about his busy day while my stomach turned. And when he leaned over to kiss me goodnight, I closed my eyes and wondered how many other lies I had kissed before. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling again, realizing that the man breathing beside me wasn't really mine anymore. Maybe he never had been. That was the day my world began to change. Not because I confronted him. I didn't. Not yet. But because for the first time in years, I saw the truth for what it was. And I saw myself, a woman who had been loving with both eyes closed, afraid to open them. That morning, I got up early, made coffee again, and looked at that same mug, best husband ever. This time, I smiled. Not out of love, not out of bitterness, but out of realization. Because somewhere deep inside, I knew that this was not the end of me. It was just the beginning of finding out who I really was without him.
When people talk about marriage, they usually start with the wedding day, the dress, the vows, the laughter. I want to start a little earlier than that, because sometimes the seeds of everything, love, pain, even betrayal, are planted long before the ceremony. I met Michael when I was 24. I had just moved to a new city for work, still figuring out how to be an adult on my own. He was older by 4 years, confident in a quiet way, with that easy smile that made you feel seen. I met him at a small cafe near my office. I remember it so clearly. I ordered a black coffee I didn't even like, just to look like I knew what I was doing in life. He sat at the next table, typing on his laptop, and I accidentally knocked my purse off the chair. Lipstick, keys, coins, everything spilled. He helped me gather it all, laughing, saying, "First day in the city?" And just like that, something began. We started meeting there every morning, first by accident, then by habit, and soon by intention. He remembered how I took my coffee. Too sweet, according to him. He teased me about my messy handwriting and said it was full of personality. He talked about his dreams, opening his own business, traveling the world, maybe starting a family someday. I listened, imagining myself somewhere in those plans, though we'd only known each other a few weeks. What drew me to him wasn't grand gestures. It was how safe he made me feel. Back then, safety felt like love. I'd grown up watching my parents build their life brick by brick. Not perfect, but solid. When Michael held my hand crossing a street or called just to ask if I'd eaten lunch, it felt like the same kind of steady love I'd always wanted. We dated for 2 years before getting married. Those years were full of firsts. Our first trip together, our first apartment with peeling paint but big windows, our first argument about whose turn it was to do dishes. Every fight ended with laughter, with him pulling me close and saying, "We're stronger than a few dirty plates." I believed him. On our wedding day, it rained. Not a drizzle, a full storm. I remember standing under the small wooden arch, my hair frizzing, my shoes soaked, and laughing anyway, because he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. He whispered during the vows, "No matter what happens, I'll always protect you." Those words felt like a promise carved in stone. The first few years were good. We weren't rich, but we had enough. We'd spend Saturdays cleaning the apartment, then order takeout and watch movies on the couch. He'd rest his head in my lap, and I'd play with his hair until he fell asleep. Sometimes I'd look at him and think, this is what love is supposed to feel like. When we bought our first house, I painted the kitchen yellow because he said it reminded him of summer. We planted a tiny garden in the backyard, tomatoes, mint, a few flowers that never really bloomed, but we tried anyway. He'd mow the lawn while I made lemonade, and we'd sit together afterward, sweaty and happy. It was simple, real, ordinary in the best way. Then life started moving faster. Michael got promoted at work, longer hours, business trips, fancy dinners I wasn't invited to. At first, I was proud. I told everyone how hardworking he was, how lucky I felt. But somewhere along the line, our conversations changed. We used to talk about dreams and silly things. Now we mostly talked about bills, schedules, and the things we forgot to do. I didn't notice it happening at first, the slow fading of us. Sometimes he'd come home late, smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't the one I bought him. He'd say, "Client dinner, don't wait up." I'd nod, pretending not to care, then sit on the couch with the TV on, just for the noise. I told myself every successful man worked hard. That's what being a supportive wife meant. Understanding, trusting, waiting. During those years, I also changed. I left my job after the company downsized and decided to freelance from home. It gave me more time, but also more silence. I filled it with chores, cooking, and taking care of every little thing so he'd have one less worry. I thought that's how love stayed strong, by giving more when the other person gave less. Friends would ask, "Don't you get lonely with him gone so much?" I'd smile and say, "No, we're just busy. It's a phase." And maybe I believed that. Or maybe I just didn't want to face what I already sensed. There were moments, though, small flashes, when I caught myself staring at him and wondering if he still saw me the same way. Like the night we went to his company's party. I wore a blue dress he once said I loved. He complimented me politely, but didn't look twice. He spent most of the evening talking to a woman from his office. Tall, confident, beautiful. I tried not to notice how his eyes lit up when she laughed. But when we got home and I stood in front of the mirror taking off my earrings, I felt something inside me break a little. Not jealousy exactly, more like invisibility. Still, I didn't say anything. I convinced myself I was overreacting, that marriage had seasons. Everyone goes through rough patches, right? One night, a few months before I found that message, I remember cooking dinner while he was on the phone in the living room.
He laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard in a while. I peeked around the corner and saw that smile, the same one that once belonged to me. He looked younger, lighter, like the world was right again. But it wasn't me making him feel that way. He hung up quickly when he saw me watching. I asked, "Who was that?" He said, "Just work stuff." Too fast, too casual. And even though my gut twisted, I nodded, pretending to believe it. That night, I cried quietly in the shower so he wouldn't hear me. I didn't even know why I was crying. Maybe because deep down I knew what was coming, but didn't have the strength to stop it. Looking back, I see how many small moments I ignored. The faint smell of perfume that wasn't mine, the sudden passwords on his phone, the way he started dressing better, caring more about how he looked when leaving the house. All of it was right there. But I kept choosing blindness because truth meant change, and change terrified me. It's strange how love can turn into fear without you noticing. You stop being a partner and start being a caretaker, a peacekeeper. You tell yourself, if I just love him harder, maybe he'll come back. But love doesn't work like that. You can't build a bridge alone. There were still good days too. Mornings when he'd surprise me with coffee, or call just to say he missed me. Those moments kept me holding on because they reminded me of the man I first met. I thought, see, he's still there. But I was clinging to fragments, not the whole picture. One weekend, we visited his parents. His mother pulled me aside while he was outside fixing something on the car. She said softly, "You look tired, sweetheart. Is everything okay?" I smiled and said, "Just busy." She nodded, but her eyes told me she didn't believe me. Sometimes mothers can sense what even we try to hide. When we drove home that evening, the silence between us felt heavier than ever. The radio played, the streetlights blurred past, and all I could think was how something once so full of laughter had turned into this quiet emptiness. That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing beside me and tried to remember the last time we truly talked, not about chores or plans, but about feelings, dreams, fears. I couldn't. Yet I still loved him. That's the part that's hardest to explain. Even when everything felt wrong, I still loved him. Because love, when it's real, doesn't switch off with betrayal. It fades slowly, like a sunset you keep chasing even after it's gone below the horizon. Sometimes I wonder if he ever felt it too, the fading. Maybe he did and just didn't know how to tell me. Maybe part of him wanted to leave, but didn't want to hurt me. Or maybe, and this hurts to admit, maybe he just didn't care enough to stay faithful. Whatever the reason, by the time I found that message, the story of us had already been ending for a long time. I just hadn't been brave enough to read the final chapter. Still, the beginning of our story matters to me because it reminds me that I was capable of love, pure, hopeful, unguarded love. And even if he couldn't honor it, I did.
Sometimes people think betrayal erases everything good that came before it, but I don't see it that way. The love I gave wasn't wasted. It was a part of me learning how deeply I could feel. And someday, I'd realize that was the first step toward finding myself again. After the day I saw that message, nothing looked the same. Our house was still in order. The dishes were clean, the curtains drawn back, the same pictures hung on the wall. But I couldn't walk from one room to another without feeling like a stranger in my own life. It's strange how something as small as a text message can make everything around you lose color. For days, I moved like I was underwater, slow, heavy, pretending nothing was wrong. Michael didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but he didn't care enough to ask. He'd talk about his work, his meetings, his long days, while I nodded along, feeling like I was playing a part in a play that had already ended. I remember one evening, we sat down for dinner. I had made his favorite, chicken pot pie, the kind he used to ask for after long days. He barely touched it. His phone kept lighting up beside him, and every time it buzzed, his hand twitched toward it, like a reflex. At one point I said softly, "Who keeps texting you so much?" He didn't look up. "Just work. They can't seem to handle anything without me." He smiled as he said it, but it didn't reach his eyes. Something inside me tightened. I wanted to believe him, but the way he said it, too casual, too rehearsed, told me otherwise. I tried to eat, but my food tasted like nothing. I sat there watching him scroll on his phone between bites, the glow of the screen reflecting off his face, and I wondered how many of our dinners had been shared with a ghost version of him, the one that only existed in his messages to someone else. That night I cried again. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears that slipped out while I lay facing the wall. He didn't notice. He fell asleep quickly, his breathing steady, like a man without worries. I kept thinking, how can he sleep so peacefully when I can barely breathe? The next morning, I tried to do something different. I put on makeup, wore a dress I hadn't worn in months, made his breakfast early. I told myself maybe we could find our way back if I just tried harder. When he walked into the kitchen, he looked at me, surprised. "Well, someone's up early," he said with a small grin. I smiled back, my heart fluttering with that familiar ache. I said, "Just thought I'd do something nice." He kissed my cheek, said thank you, and grabbed his keys. Before leaving, he added, "Don't wait up. Might be a long day." And just like that, the little hope I had built up in the morning faded before noon. That's how it was for weeks, a tug of war between hope and heartbreak. Every time I thought about confronting him, fear held me back. I kept asking myself, what if I'm wrong? What if I ruin everything for nothing? So instead, I watched. I started noticing patterns, the way he'd always step outside to take certain calls, the sudden trips that didn't match his old work schedule, the faint smell of unfamiliar perfume that clung to his clothes. Once I found a small receipt in his jacket pocket from a restaurant we had never been to, one that was far across town. The date on it was a night he told me he was working late. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at that little piece of paper, my hands shaking. It was just a receipt, but it felt like a confession. I put it back where I found it. I didn't need more proof. The proof was already in the way I felt, unwanted, unseen, unloved. It's hard to explain what that kind of loneliness feels like when you live with the person causing it. You wake up beside them, make them coffee, fold their clothes, listen to their stories, and yet you feel invisible. There's no silence louder than the one between two people who used to love each other. One afternoon, I decided to visit my sister, Anna. I hadn't seen her in a while because I kept making excuses. Too busy, not feeling well, maybe next week. But that day, I just needed to be around someone who remembered me before I became this shadow of myself. She opened the door, saw my face, and frowned. She said, "What's wrong?" immediately. I didn't want to tell her. I didn't want to say the words out loud because somehow that would make them real. But when she hugged me, the truth slipped out in pieces. "I think he's seeing someone," I whispered. Her arms tightened around me. "Are you sure?" I shook my head.
No, but I feel it. I felt it for a long time. She pulled back, looked at me, and said softly, "You don't need proof to feel broken, you know. You just need honesty with yourself." That sentence stayed with me for days because she was right. I had been waiting for undeniable proof before allowing myself to admit what my heart already knew. After that visit, I started keeping a small journal, not to spy or track him, but to hold myself together. Every night I'd write down how I felt, even if it was just a single sentence. Today I felt invisible. Today he didn't notice I was quiet. Today I tried to smile, but it hurt. It became my way of breathing through the pain. One evening, about a month after finding that first text, something shifted. Michael came home later than usual. I was in the living room pretending to watch TV. When he walked in, I could tell he had been drinking. Not much, but enough to loosen his guard. He sat beside me, sighed deeply, and said, "You've been quiet lately." I turned to him. "Have I?" He nodded. "Yeah. You okay?" It was almost laughable. Him asking if I was okay when he was the reason I wasn't. But I just smiled faintly and said, "I'm fine." He looked at me for a moment, searching my face, then shrugged and turned on the TV. That was it. No real concern, no follow-up, just an empty gesture that only deepened the space between us. Later that night, I sat on the balcony alone. The air was cool, the streetlights flickered softly. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who laughed easily, who believed love was enough, who trusted without fear. Where had she gone? I realized she hadn't disappeared overnight. She had slowly faded, one compromise at a time. Every time I forgave without healing, every time I stayed silent to keep the peace, a little piece of her had slipped away. That's when the thought first crossed my mind. Not of revenge, not of leaving immediately, but of rediscovery. I needed to find that woman again, even if it meant walking through heartbreak to get there. I didn't know what that would look like yet. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living half a life pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. The following week, I went through our closet, sorting things. Not because I was planning to leave, but because I needed order in a world that suddenly felt chaotic. As I folded clothes, I found an old photo album, our first vacation together, years ago. We looked so young, so happy. I traced my fingers over the picture and felt tears fill my eyes. It wasn't anger I felt, it was grief. Grief for the love we once had, grief for the woman I used to be, grief for the story that was ending, even if I hadn't said the words out loud. That night, I closed the album, put it back on the shelf, and whispered to myself, "It's time." Not to confront him, not yet, but time to stop living in denial. Time to start preparing my heart for the truth, whatever it would bring. I didn't know how soon that truth would come crashing down, or how it would change everything. But somewhere, deep inside, for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to courage. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of finding my way back to myself.
The night it all came crashing down began like any other. It was late September, one of those evenings when summer hasn't quite let go and the air still smells faintly of warmth and dust. Michael texted that he'd be home late, another client dinner. I didn't reply. I just read the message, set my phone face down, and kept stirring the soup on the stove. Even silence can become a language after a while. Around 9:30, I poured myself a bowl, sat at the kitchen table, and ate alone. The clock ticked steadily. The house felt hollow. When I was done, I rinsed my bowl, wiped the counter, and told myself to stop waiting. But I still left the porch light on. By 11, he still wasn't home. I sat on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through channels, the sound low. When headlights finally swept across the curtains, my stomach clenched. He came in smelling of cologne and something faintly floral. Perfume, I realized, not mine. "Hey," he said softly, almost careful. "Hey," I answered. He loosened his tie, kicked off his shoes, and walked past me toward the bedroom without another word. I sat there for a minute, feeling the blood rushing my ears. Something in me broke free that night, the part of me that kept saying, "Wait for the right time." There wasn't going to be a right time. I followed him down the hallway. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. "Michael," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked up, surprised. "Yeah? Who is she?" For a moment he froze, then frowned, forcing a small laugh. "What are you talking about?" I saw the messages. A while ago. I didn't want to believe them. He looked down at the phone in his hands, then back at me. "You went through my phone?" "I didn't have to," I said quietly. "You left it right there." The air between us felt thick. He stood up, walked to the dresser, set his phone down. "Look, you're overreacting. It's not what you think." I shook my head. "Then tell me what it is." He hesitated. Too long. That pause told me everything words never could. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "It just happened." Those 3 words sliced through me. I felt my knees weaken. I had to sit down. "It just happened?" I repeated, half laughing, half sobbing. "That's what people say about rain, Michael, not betrayal." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "How far is this far?" I asked. He looked away. Silence again. The worst kind. That silence stretched until I whispered, "How long?" He said, "A few months, maybe more." I remember nodding slowly because my body needed something to do while my mind tried to catch up. A few months, maybe more. All those nights I cooked dinner alone, all those lies about late meetings, each one replayed in my head like broken film reels. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, hands clasped, feeling the weight of all the years between us pressing down on my chest. I asked one last question. "Do you love her?" He hesitated again. That was answer enough. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I held them back. "Okay," I said quietly, standing up. He looked at me, confused. "Okay?" "Yes, okay." I walked past him into the hallway. My hands were shaking, but my steps felt sure. In the living room, I grabbed my purse, my keys, and the sweater hanging by the door. He followed me. "Where are you going?" "I don't know. Just out." He reached for my arm, but I stepped away. "Please don't." And for the first time, he didn't argue. He just stood there watching me leave. I drove without a destination. The streets were nearly empty, the city quiet except for distant traffic. I rolled down the window and let the air hit my face, cold and sharp. It felt cleansing somehow, like the night was reminding me I was still alive. I ended up at a small park we used to visit when we were first dating. There was a bench near the fountain. I sat there hugging myself against the chill. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, the water glimmering faintly. I cried then, not the quiet tears of the past weeks, but deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere buried. I cried for the girl who believed love could fix anything. I cried for the years I spent waiting for a version of him that no longer existed. I cried because I loved with everything I had, and it still wasn't enough. When I finally stopped, the world felt still again. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and whispered, "It's over." Saying it out loud didn't fix anything, but it made it real. I stayed on that bench until dawn. When the first light appeared, soft and gray, I decided I wasn't going back home. Not yet. I texted my sister, "Can I come over?" Her reply came fast, "Of course. Come anytime." When she opened the door and saw me, puffy eyes, same clothes, trembling, she didn't ask questions. She just helped me. And I broke again. But this time the tears felt different, like release, not defeat. Over coffee, I told her everything. She listened quietly, then said something that stuck with me forever. "You can forgive him someday if you want, but right now, forgive yourself first for not knowing sooner, for loving too much, for staying too long." Those words settled into me like a seed. For the next few days, I stayed at her place. Michael called, texted, even showed up once. But I couldn't face him. Each message began with "I'm sorry" and ended with "please come home." But home wasn't a place anymore. It was a memory. On the third night, I finally answered the phone. His voice was quiet, shaky. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then said, "There's nothing left to say." "Please," he whispered, "I made a mistake." "You made choices. Mistakes are accidents. You knew what you were doing." He didn't argue. After a long pause, he said, "I never wanted to hurt you." And for the first time, I believed him. He hadn't wanted to hurt me, he just hadn't thought about me at all. Before hanging up, I told him, "I hope someday you learn how to love without breaking what's beautiful." Then I ended the call. It was the most painful peace I ever felt. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, silence, and small realizations. I packed some of my things, filed for separation, and tried to relearn how to live without checking my phone for his messages. The first morning alone felt strange, like waking up in a world that had changed shape overnight. I made coffee for one. The house was quiet, but not empty. For the first time, the silence belonged to me. I went for walks in the park again, this time noticing the sound of leaves crunching under my shoes, the laughter of kids on swings, the way sunlight hit the water. It felt like rediscovering color after living in grayscale. Sometimes, memories would sneak up on me. A song, a smell, a place we once went. At first they hurt, sharp and sudden. But slowly they softened into something I could hold without breaking. Not joy, not pain, just acceptance. One evening, about a month later, I drove past that cafe where we first met. I parked across the street and watched couples inside laughing over coffee. For a moment, I felt that old ache again, the one that says, "Why did it have to end like this?" Then I realized endings are never neat. They're just the point where pain becomes possibility. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Instead, I whispered a quiet thank you. To the girl I was, to the man who taught me what I'd never accept again, to the life that was waiting beyond the hurt. Driving home, I rolled down the window and let the cool air fill the car. The sky was dark, but ahead of me, a faint line of light was starting to rise. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I just felt free. The morning I moved into my own apartment, the sky was the color of fresh paper, blank, waiting. It was a small place on the second floor of an old building near the library.
The walls smelled faintly of paint and dust. The windows let in wide rectangles of sunlight. And when I turned the key for the first time, I whispered, "Hello, new life," just to hear how it sounded. There wasn't much furniture, just a borrowed couch, a small kitchen table, and a mattress on the floor. But the space felt like mine. Every corner carried silence that belonged only to me, not to waiting or wondering. That first night, I sat cross-legged on the mattress, eating Chinese takeout from the box and listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Freedom has a sound, I realized. It's small and steady, like breathing. For weeks, I kept my life simple. I woke up early, made coffee, walked to the park, and applied for jobs again. The routine gave me something solid to hold on to. Some mornings, I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. Hair pulled up, tired eyes, but there was a steadiness in her gaze I hadn't seen before. I started journaling. Nothing fancy, just a notebook I bought at the dollar store. Each night, I'd write a few sentences. What I felt, what I noticed, what I wanted. At first, the pages were heavy with anger and confusion. But slowly, the tone changed. The sentences grew lighter, filled with gratitude for small things. Sunlight on the kitchen floor, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs, the way the neighbor's cat always stretched in the same sunny spot. Healing wasn't loud. It was quiet, like roots growing underground. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend, Lisa, at the grocery store. We hadn't talked in years. She took one look at me and said, "You look different. Peaceful, maybe?" I smiled. "Trying to be." We ended up grabbing coffee together, and for the first time in a long while, I laughed without feeling guilty for it. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for too long. About 2 months after I left Michael, he sent me an email. The subject line was just, "I'm sorry." I hesitated before opening it. Inside were long paragraphs, apologies, explanations, words I'd once begged to hear. He said he'd ended things with her, that he missed me, that he couldn't sleep without thinking of what he'd done. I read it once, twice, then closed my laptop. There was a time when those words would have shattered me. Now they just felt heavy, like stones I didn't need to carry anymore. I didn't reply. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes closure is choosing not to respond." And I meant it. I began volunteering at a community center on weekends. It was just reading stories to kids, nothing complicated, but it made my heart lighter. They'd sit in a circle, eyes wide, laughing at the silliest parts, and I'd forget for a little while that my heart had ever been broken. One little girl, Mia, used to wait for me every Saturday, holding out the same book and saying, "Read this one again." It was about a bird learning to fly after falling. Each time I read it, I heard my own story in it. I also started taking small trips, day drives to nearby towns, quiet walks by the river, evenings at little diners where nobody knew my name. Being alone stopped feeling like loneliness. It started feeling like freedom. There's a difference between being alone and being abandoned. One feels empty, the other feels open. My sister kept checking in. One evening, she came over with wine and pizza, flopped on my couch and said, "You know what? I'm proud of you." I laughed. For what? For surviving divorce on microwave noodles? She said, "For rediscovering yourself. You didn't let it turn you bitter." That night, we talked for hours about love, about mistakes, about how sometimes people outgrow each other quietly. Before she left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "You're going to be okay." And for the first time, I believed it completely. A A few weeks later, I found an old photo of Michael and me tucked inside a book I hadn't opened in years. We were smiling, wind in our hair, arms around each other. For a moment, my chest tightened, but then I looked closer. I didn't see a man I missed. I saw two people who had loved the best they could with what they knew at the time. That realization softened something inside me. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't forgive everything he did, but I forgave myself for loving him. That was enough. Spring came. I planted flowers in little pots on my balcony, lavender, marigold, mint. Every morning I watered them, watched them stretch toward the sun, and thought, that's me too. Growth looks simple from the outside, but it's full of quiet strength underneath. I started a new job at a local design studio. My boss was kind, the team small and friendly. They didn't know my story, and I liked that. It felt good to be just me, not someone's wife or someone's heartbreak. Work filled my days with purpose again. One afternoon during lunch break, a coworker named Daniel asked if I wanted to join their weekend hiking group. I hesitated. Old me would have said no immediately, but new me said, sure, why not? That Saturday, I found myself standing at the edge of a trail surrounded by laughter, sunlight, and fresh air. The climb was tough, but reaching the top was worth it. The view stretched endlessly, and the wind felt like freedom on my skin. I realized then how far I'd come, not just up that hill, but out of the darkness I'd lived in for years. Healing didn't mean I stopped thinking about Michael. Sometimes memories still surfaced, like echoes, but they no longer controlled me. They just existed. Pieces of a story that had shaped me, but didn't define me. One rainy evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and thought about the woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet, who accepted excuses, who mistook comfort for love. I wanted to reach back in time and tell her, you were strong even then. You just didn't know it. Because that's the truth. Strength doesn't always look like walking away dramatically. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to stop waiting for someone to change. Sometimes it's choosing your own peace over shared chaos. 6 months after I moved out, I got a call from Michael's mother. She sounded gentle, almost nervous. Sweetheart, I just wanted to check on you. Michael told me everything. I didn't know what to say. She went on, I'm so sorry for what he did. You were good to him. You didn't deserve that. Her words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you, I said softly. I'm okay now. She replied, I know. I can hear it in your voice. When we hung up, I sat there for a long moment, realizing how much had changed. Once, I'd have given anything to hear someone from his family take my side. Now I didn't need it, but it still felt kind. As months rolled by, my life began to fill with new colors. I hosted little dinners for friends, tried new recipes, even painted one wall of my living room a soft blue just because it made me happy. I bought a secondhand bike and rode it along the waterfront on Sundays. Each small choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Sometimes people asked if I'd date again. I'd smile and say, maybe someday. But deep down, I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted to know myself fully first, to love the woman I'd become before inviting anyone else in. There's something beautiful about rebuilding your heart brick by brick, with your own hands. One evening, I was walking home from work when I passed a couple holding hands, laughing. Instead of feeling sad or envious, I found myself smiling. Love hadn't failed me. It had just taught me what I deserved. And now I was finally ready to give that love to myself. That night, I wrote one final note in my journal for the day. Healing isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's about remembering who you are without the pain. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and sat quietly in the dark, feeling whole.
A year later, I woke up one morning and realized something had shifted. The ache that used to live inside me had turned into something softer, memory, not pain. The house was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping on the windows. I sat up in bed, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, and smiled without needing a reason. Peace has a sound, too. It's the sound of nothing missing. That morning, I brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching the city come alive. People hurried down sidewalks with umbrellas, cars splashed through puddles, and the air smelled of wet pavement and morning bread from the bakery across the street. It felt like life was moving again, and this time I was part of it, not standing on the outside looking in. There's something beautiful about ordinary mornings. For a long time, I thought happiness had to be grand like fireworks. Now I know it's quiet, like steam rising from a cup of coffee or the warmth of clean sheets. That's what healing does. It teaches you to love the small things again. One Saturday, I decided to visit the coastal town where Michael and I spent our honeymoon years ago, not to relive the past, just to see it with new eyes. I drove there early, the highway open and bright under a blue sky. When I reached the beach, the wind was strong and the ocean restless. I took off my shoes, walked along the shore, and let the water rush over my feet. Everything looked the same, the pier, the gulls, the distant lighthouse. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. I stood there, watching waves crash and pull away, and thought about how love can be like that too. It comes in strong, fills your world, then retreats, leaving you standing in your own footprints, learning balance again. For a while, I just breathed. The salt air tasted like freedom. I whispered a quiet goodbye, not to him, but to the version of me who believed she needed someone else to complete her. She had loved deeply, lost painfully, and still found the strength to stand here, alive and whole. Before I left, I picked up a small, smooth stone from the sand and slipped it into my pocket, a reminder that even the roughest waves polish what they touch. Back in the city, I started writing more seriously. The journal that once held my pain began to fill with reflections, small lessons, and bits of advice I wished someone had told me when I was breaking. I didn't plan it, but eventually, those pages turned into a blog. At first, only a few people read it, mostly friends and coworkers, but then strangers began to comment. "Your words sound like my story. Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." And I realized something powerful. Pain shared with honesty becomes connection. Writing helped me see my journey clearly. It wasn't a story of loss. It was a story of returning to myself. People often ask how I found forgiveness, and I tell them it wasn't about excusing what happened. It was about choosing peace over bitterness. Carrying hate feels heavy. Letting go feels like learning to breathe again. Around the same time, Daniel, the coworker from our hiking group, became a closer friend. We'd grab coffee after work, talk about books, travel, and music. He never asked about my past unless I wanted to share. And when I did, he listened quietly, never trying to fix it. That silence felt like safety. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the rooftop cafe near our office,
He turned to me and said, "You know, you have this calm about you, like someone who's been through a storm and made peace with the rain." I smiled. Maybe I have. It wasn't a love concession, just a gentle acknowledgement between two people who understood what it means to rebuild. I didn't rush anything. I wasn't looking for another love story. I was writing my own life story this time. But his kindness reminded me that good people still exist and that trust, when it returns, can grow slowly like spring after a long winter. As the months passed, my little apartment began to change too. The walls were covered with framed photos of sunsets, notes, and watercolor prints I made myself. Books lined the shelves again. Friends came over more often, filling the place with laughter and stories. It no longer felt like a temporary shelter from heartbreak. It felt like home. Sometimes I'd light a candle in the evening and play soft music, just to enjoy the stillness. There was no one to impress, no one to wait for. Just me, existing, content. I think about how strange it was that the same space that once felt so empty had become sacred. I wasn't rebuilding the life I lost. I was creating a new one from scratch. One morning, I ran into Michael unexpectedly at a bookstore downtown. It had been almost 2 years since we'd spoken. He looked older, a little tired, but there was kindness in his smile when he saw me. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," I replied. For a moment, time folded. Two people who once shared everything, now standing as strangers with shared history. We talked briefly about work, life, the weather. He said he was doing better, trying to be a different man. I told him I was happy he was finding his way. When he said, "You look happy," I nodded. I am, and I meant it. As I left the store, I felt an odd warmth in my chest. Not love, not regret, just peace. It was closure I didn't know I still needed. I'd once thought healing meant forgetting someone completely. Now I knew it meant remembering without hurting. That evening, I walked home through the park. The air was cool, the trees golden with early autumn. I sat on a bench, closed my eyes, and thought about everything that brought me here. The nights I cried until morning, the mornings I couldn't get out of bed, the quiet victories that no one saw. Every painful moment had shaped me into someone softer but stronger, someone who knew how to be alone without feeling lonely, someone who believed again in beginnings. When I got home that night, I opened my journal one last time. The pages were nearly full now. Thousands of words, months of emotion, growth, realization. I flipped through them slowly, smiling at how far I'd come. The last page was still blank. I picked up my pen and wrote, "This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning of the part where I truly live." I closed the book and set it on the shelf. For the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to document every feeling. Some peace doesn't need to be written. It just needs to be lived. That weekend, I took a long drive to the countryside. The air smelt like pine and rain. The sky stretched wide and open. I parked on a hilltop, stepped out, and stood there watching the horizon. There was no destination, no hurry, just the quiet joy of existing. As the wind blew through my hair, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of endings anymore. They were just another way life makes room for beginnings. The woman I'd become wasn't the same one who once whispered, "Please don't leave." She was the one who finally said, I'm enough. Now, whenever someone tells me their heart is breaking, I don't rush to comfort them with cliches. I just say, you'll survive this, and one day you'll thank yourself for how strong you had to become. Because heartbreak doesn't destroy you, it rebuilds you in ways you can't see at first. It burns away illusions until only truth remains. And that truth is powerful. You are always enough, even when someone else doesn't see it. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the woman I was before everything changed. I see her sitting at the kitchen table, waiting, believing, forgiving too easily. And I want to tell her, you're going to be okay. One day you'll wake up and the world will feel light again. And she'll believe it because she lived it.
If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that love isn't about holding on. It's about learning when to let go gracefully. And healing isn't about going back. It's about walking forward with gentleness, even if you're still limping. The truth is, every heartbreak holds a mirror to who we are. Mine showed me a woman who could rebuild, rediscover, and still believe in kindness. It showed me that endings aren't punishment. They're invitations to begin again, wiser this time. As I end this story, I don't see it as a tragedy anymore. It's a transformation. The day I found out my husband wasn't the man I married was also the day I started meeting the woman I was always meant to be. And that, more than anything, is the kind of love story worth telling.